Hey guys, today I'm going to do a quick little tier list of all the expansions in World of Warcraft, going from worst to best. And we're going to start with the worst expansion. That's Battle for Azeroth. Now, BFA had a lot of new features. We had the corruption system, the essence system. We had Azerite armor. We even had island expeditions. And I feel like all of those that I just mentioned failed horribly. And maybe not all quite as bad as like maybe island expeditions, for example, but I don't feel like any of them really turned out to what the player base wanted. And really, war mode is the only thing I can think of for BFA that turned out to be a good new feature. And so there really was nothing good that was really that significant in BFA, in my opinion. And that's why it takes the bottom slot. It's not fun to play. It's grindy, and it didn't really add anything to the game that's really succeeded. So BFA takes our bottom slot. Following that, we've got the Cataclysm. Now, Cataclysm, not the greatest of expansions. In terms of endgame content, it was still pretty fun because it took off where Wrath of the Lich King let off, but it made some pretty bad changes to the game. Introducing LFR, introducing the new world, new Azeroth post Cataclysm, just kind of destroyed the old methodology of the game. Replaced all of the old quests with like new mini game style quests, which I'm not a fan of, where you're like shooting bears into a tree or using vehicles instead of playing more, focusing on your character. And then we also had like I mentioned, LFR. LFR is not the greatest feature, not great for community, not really rewarding gameplay, kind of just free loot. No one says anything, just queues up and gets it done. So for that reason, Cataclysm is ranked at the bottom along with BFA. The reason it has the edge over BFA is because it was just more fun to play and less grindy. So the grind is the factor there. Now, the first decent expansion we're going to talk about is Legion. I feel like Legion suffers from a lot of the grind, a lot of the randomness that bleeds into BFA. But overall, it added Mythic Plus, which was a great system. And the class design was really, really good. Set bonuses were cool. Raids were great. Dungeons were great. But the Legion legendary system I thought was pretty poor. I thought it incentivized just a ton of grinding and then a lot of RNG on which legendary you're going to get. They cleaned it up at the end, but it was not a great system. Also didn't like the artifact weapons. Didn't like that everyone has the exact same weapon. And didn't like the grind, like I mentioned, to keep the weapon upgrading. And not a fan of missing out on like weapon upgrades, right? In other expansions, you get a weapon to drop. It's a huge upgrade. That's something that you just never got to experience in Legion. So also the introduction of random gear from PvP. You can no longer buy it from vendor. That's a big bummer for me, but that's why Legion is pretty far down despite having Mythic Plus and great class design. Following that, we have Mists of Pandaria. Mists of Pandaria is kind of here. They didn't really do a whole lot, good or bad, and it was just a fun expansion to play. The content itself at 90 was great. I like the Timeless Isle and the world PvP there. It wasn't like amazing or anything by any means, but it certainly was more fun than some of the more recent expansions. And the PvP was great. There was cool abilities like Symbiosis, but they really didn't add anything too ground shaking except for the the challenge mode dungeons, which led into Mythic Plus. So you could say that's a pretty big pro. So all in all, Mists of Pandaria, nothing too crazy, nothing too bad. Good expansion. Next, we have the Wrath of the Lich King. Now, Wrath of the Lich King is going to be the worst expansion in Amazing, except for a final patch, or a later patch, which added in Looking for Group and Heirlooms. Besides that, Wrath of the Lich King really would have been the best expansion if not for that. The problem is Heirlooms are so bad for the game, and LFG is so bad for the game. All of a sudden now it's just about boosting your characters to level 80 as fast as possible rather than leveling actually being a part of the game. It's just trivial from that point on. And since then, it's never been what it was in Classic or Burning Crusade. And really the only reason leveling still exists post Wrath is just to sell boosts, and it's just prerequisite. The real content starts at max level these days. So really disappointing features there. But Wrath had great dungeons, great lore. Everyone loves the Lich King. Old War was great. ICC was great. A lot of the the heroic dungeons were fun in the ICC patch. There's a lot of dailies, but a lot of the reputation you could just get by wearing a tabard and doing dungeons. And so it wasn't too grindy at all. And so, all in all, Wrath, great expansion, but, couple flaws. Also to mention, Death Knights were pretty cool, but tough to balance. And stuff like Rep Paladin and Elemental Shaman got much more flushed out in Wrath. So, great expansion. Next, we have the Classic or Vanilla. And the reason we put Vanilla here, right? Great RPG, great in terms of the world feeling important and your reputation on the server mattering and community, and pretty much every RPG element you can think of, right? You can blockade things in the middle of the road, and you can chase people down if you have a faster mount, and all sorts of stuff. So great RPG. The big flaw with Classic, number one, not enough endgame content besides raiding. Number two, the PvP system's atrocious. And so for those two reasons, prevent it from being, like a top tier expansion. But it is still a great game. Still the foundation that WoW was built upon. And a lot of things about WoW really would be, we almost need to remodel after how Classic did things, especially now that we've played Classic and have experienced, what makes it great. So after Classic, we have Burning Crusade. And Burning Crusade was a big improvement over Classic to me. And it took an already great game with some, big flaws, and it really patched them up. There's much more endgame content in TBC. I like the raid sizes better. They added new abilities, but it's still, the talent tree still felt like a Classic talent tree. And it was just a great expansion, a great following to Classic. Now, there were some people that did not like TBC because of flying and how it interacted with world PvP or changed the world feel. And they also didn't like that we left Azeroth. And I can't really argue against that. All I can say is that all specs improved pretty much in terms of enjoyability and just viability for the lesser specs for sure, and just more endgame content to do, and professions mattered. It was just great expansion. Following that, we have the best expansion, right? Warlords of Draenor. A lot of people sleep on Warlords of Draenor because they're just, they just parrot what they hear, that Warlords of Draenor just had a huge content drought, and it was never good, right? And that's just not the case. It is the case that there was a huge content drought, but before the drought, Warlords of Draenor was the best World of Warcraft has ever been, and probably will ever be. And the reason for this is Warlords of Draenor was right in the middle of some of the modern expansions versus, the old school type of expansion. And what that led to is World of Warcraft had that kind of that janky feeling in a lot of the earlier expansions. So I'm thinking especially Classic and TBC, a lot of the rotations don't really flow. You still have classes like Warlocks spamming Shadow Bolt as their only abilities. And then fast forward to BFA and Legion, and you have these, really complex rotations. And I feel like Warlords of Draenor was right in the middle, right in that perfect zone where it's not as complicated as BFA. And while I think a lot of the class changes were better in Legion, right, there's just too many bad things introduced at the same time to where WoD had decent, spec design, decent class design, and it was still, you still had the rewarding gearing experience. You still were able to get PvP gear from a vendor. You still had set bonuses in PvP, and it was the last, expansion before a lot of the randomness kicked in from Legion and BFA, and you still had a lot of the rewarding gearing experience like in the previous expansions. And a lot of people say that Warlords of Draenor wasn't good because of garrisons. And well, guess what? Follower missions are still in the game. People still like them. They still do them for they were in Legion, they're in BFA. People still like them. It is just something to do with the garrison and separating from a city, which, it's a fair point. But, the garrison also added other things like convenience. So you easily had access to like bank and stuff, and you could see your mounts in there. All in all, I mean, I'm not in love with the idea of the garrison, but it wasn't nearly as bad as people say. And the follower missions are still something in the game that people like. Warlords of Draenor also added in new models, and the models are really sick. And you just look back at some of the old models, and they're so goofy from the older expansions. In WoD onward, you can see that especially the animations for like the orc is just much better in Warlords of Draenor and on. And so they didn't add any new races in Warlords of Draenor. They didn't add anything too crazy to the game. There was really no new major features. But what they did have is it was just a fun game to play. And it was the last time WoW was great. The PvP was great. The raids were great. The gear looked cool. And all in all, Warlords of Draenor was the best expansion. No major cons associated with the actual game, except for the fact that there was a content drought. But if we're looking at it at its best, it was the best Warcraft ever was. It was that sweet spot of smooth gameplay while still being rewarding. And I don't think we're ever going to reach the pinnacle of WoD ever again. But that's it for this time. Let me know what you guys think. What expansions would you have on your tier list? And catch you next time.